Okay, so the first watercolor technique we're going to learn today is the graded wash. A graded wash is a really basic watercolor technique where we have the color strong on one side and more watery on the other side. Learning how to do a graded wash is essential to learning how to do anything in watercolor because it is used under other things. It's used for a lot of different things. So you can do a single color graded wash. You can do a double color graded wash like this one here. It goes from yellow to green or yellow to blue depending on what you want to do. So the basic idea of a graded wash. So what we have here is our station with where it's our clean water and our dirty water. We're going to take some clean water. There we go. You can see that now. I'm going to do my graded wash right here. Take some clean water to your palette, okay, and then choose your color. I'm going to stick with blue. Blue is a great color for a graded wash. Oh, that's sort of purpley. Let's do a purple graded wash. Maybe a little bit of blue mixed in there. There we go. So we're going to mix in a little bit of color, and then I'm going to clean my dirty brush in my dirty water. So now my brush is totally clean. Try to keep your dirty water separate from your clean water because we're going to be using the clean water. So now with a clean brush and just some water, I'm going to put water on this whole bubble, just water. So the thing about watercolor painting is it is notoriously difficult to control, and a lot of people have sort of a love-hate relationship with watercolor because they find it hard to control where the water flows. So the only thing you need to remember about controlling watercolor is wherever the paper is wet, see how I'm going around the edge there with my wet brush? So now this whole area is wet, nice and shiny and wet. Wherever the paper is wet, the water will flow. Wherever the paper is dry, the water will stop, or the watercolor will stop. So I'm going to pick up some clean water, pick up some of this watery paint that I mixed up over here, and I'm going to drop it in at the base of this. And you're going to see that the watercolor will flow wherever the paper is wet, and it will stop. It's called a paper dam. The watercolor will stop wherever the watercolor paper is dry. So I'm going to encourage this to go up. I'm going to clean my brush in the dirty water and then pick up some clean water. And just with clean water, I'm going to encourage this color to move towards the edge. Picking up some of that color, moving it from the heavier side of color to the lighter side of color. Dirty water, clean my brush, pick up some clean water, and move that. Okay, it's not quite dark enough at the bottom for my liking, so I'm going to add a little bit of extra color here at the base. Dropping in some watercolor there. I'm going to let it flow where the paper is a little bit more wet. Picking it up here. One thing you don't want to ever do is go straight from your palette to your paper. You want to make sure that you always go from your watercolor palette to your plastic palette and back and forth that way. So what I don't want in a graded wash is, I'm just going to move the camera down just a little bit so you can see. So in a graded wash, what you don't want is to be able to see a line where the dark and the light. We want it to be a gradual dark to light. So I'm going to use my dirty water, pick up some clean water, and with the clean water, I'm just going to pull some of this color up from the dark area to the lighter area. Then I'm going to clean my brush in my dirty water, pick up some clean water, and with the clean water, pull that back up. Okay, pick up some water. We still want a tiny bit of color on this side, but we want the color to mostly be saturated on this side. So, and you can do this as many times as you want to get a color wash from dark to light. So now I'm darkening that with another layer. Dirty water, clean water. You use your paper towel here sort of like a sponge. Think of your paintbrush when you're painting with watercolors as a sponge. You can, if you want, if you put too much paint down somewhere, now this brush is really nice and dry, I can pick it up with this paintbrush. I can lift it right off with my paintbrush, put it in the dirty water, clean it off on my paintbrush, pick up some clean water, and then I can go and carry on with my graded wash. Okay, so the idea behind a graded wash is that you have dark color one side, sort of an ombre, dark color one side, lighter color on the other side, and they flow from one to the next without any visible seams between dark, medium, and light. And the darker you can make your dark side, the more contrast you're going to get. So this technique is one of the best techniques to learn for watercolor painting, because this is how you would achieve a sky. You know, maybe a sunset if you wanted to use several different colors. If you wanted to use another color, you'd drop it in on that side, and then you would pull it, pull one color down this way and the other color up that way. So, and as the color sort of saturates the paper and flows into the paper, you'll be able to, if there's too much here, I could use some clean water, get my brush nice and dry, and I can lift that back off with my paintbrush. Use my paintbrush as a sponge to lift it back off the areas where it gets too dark. Okay, so there we have a completed graded wash. I might put just a little bit more dark on this side, and then we'll see how that dries. You can see the paper's buckling just the tiniest little bit. That's what the tape is there for. It's to help this dry nice and flat. And you don't take the tape off until this whole thing is 100% done. Okay, so as I'm finishing this graded wash, the next technique that I'm going to do is going to be in one of these bubbles, but I don't want to do the next technique in this bubble or this bubble because this is still wet. So I either wait for this to be dry 100%, or I work over here or over here, I guess, where it's not touching at all. Because if I start working in one that's attached to this and I use a different color, they're going to flow together. That's the thing that people find the most frustrating about watercolor. My thing that I find frustrating about watercolor sometimes is that I forget which is my dirty water, which is my clean water. So you can see how this edge is so nice and crisp and clean, and that's because I wet the paper first. So you get the paper wet, you drop your colors in, you let them flow, and they will stop wherever the paper is dry. Okay, for our second technique, we're going to do a salt texture technique. So what I've done is in advance I've used my clean water and I've wet this entire shape here, completely wet with tons of water. This is quite a bit of water. Being careful around the edges so that it doesn't kind of run past my pencil lines, but I'm going to get this space quite wet, the whole space wet with clean water. Oops. A little bit of water there. I'll just pick that up with my sponge, my paper towel. And I've also, in advance, I've mixed up a few little palette with some pretty saturated, really kind of funky colors. So what we're going to do now is with that water there, we're going to drop in some really saturated colors and just let them move around inside that pool of water. Really needs to be quite a bit of water. And I'm going to clean my brush in my dirty water so I can pick up some of this color and have that move around here. And then clean my brush in my dirty water, pick up some clean water, and just a little bit of yellow here and there, just for fun. Okay? So now before this sinks into the paper, I'm going to take some salt. So this is regular old table salt. And I'm going to pour the table salt, sprinkle a little bit of, just regular old everyday salt onto there. I also have some coarse salt, some sea salt. and I'm going to drop some of those in there. The areas that you can see where there's lots of pools of color are really going to suck up this salt. You can put as much salt on there or as little salt as you want. And what happens here is the watercolor is going to be sort of sucked up by, I need some more intense purple here. So the watercolor is going to get sucked up by the watercolor paints are going to get sucked up by this salt, and so we're going to just let it sit there, and we're going to let it kind of absorb all of that until it's completely dry. If I want to, if I've got some pools around the edge, like right here, so I've cleaned my brush, I've taken most of the water off with my paper towel, I can use my brush to kind of lift some of these pools. If they're getting too close to the edge, you use your brush like a sponge to pick up some of that color so it doesn't run over the edges. But you can see, even though it was a huge pool of water, it is staying put right where I put it. Okay, so I'm going to need a little bit more table salt. The table salt gives you sort of a really soft, kind of a snowflake effect on the paper once it's dry, and the coarse salt there is really going to make some dark shapes. So when it's done, it's going to look like this. So those big kind of shapes there are the big sea salt in the middle, and we flick those away after it's dry. And those tiny little snowflake areas right there are the little sea salt, or sorry, the table salt. So it gives us a really interesting sort of texture effect in watercolor when you put salt in it when it's wet. Now it doesn't work unless you use quite saturated color and quite a lot of water, and you have to do it while the paint is still quite wet. If the paint is drying, if it's soaking into the paper already, it's not going to work as well. Okay, so sometimes you have to do a technique like this a couple times before you get it right. So now I'm going to let this sink into the paper, and once it's 100% dry, like in an hour or two, I can just brush that salt off and look at the texture effects that are left behind. This would be a great texture if you were doing a sandy beach, or if you wanted to put some texture on some rocks, if you were painting a landscape. It's a really great way to add kind of that kind of natural texture to your watercolors.